Welcome back. Talking about guns and gun laws in Tennessee. We have with us the president of the Tennessee Firearms Association, John Harris, and several calls. So let's go to David. Hello, David.
Hi, Dave. And how are you doing this afternoon?
Just great. What's on your mind?
Good. You know, you've talked a lot about crime and criminals here recently, and guns. What about the criminal court officers that'll do everything in their power to increase their profit security and their job security? And they do this through the intentional, incomplete, incorrect recording of criminal judgments that end without conviction, without plea bargain. And if you have no use for a handgun, like I didn't, then the damage done by the FBI background check will chase you for the rest of your life. And once upon a time, the state of Tennessee got me for 24 years of damage and 10 years of the Patriot List. So you'll never hear a criminal court officer truly complain about crime because they'll do everything in their power to create it.
Now, all right, is there a question? Do you understand?
I'm not even sure what the topic was.
Okay. All right, David, thank you. I'm going to transition. The whole thing about background checks, that is an issue where there's some discussion up at the legislature, and what are some of the things maybe on the table when it comes to background checks and those getting access to guns?
Well, the issue of the background check is another one of those examples where the position that we've taken within the Tennessee Firearms Association is constitutional carry is where we need to be. Constitutional carry would not require a background check. Under federal law, you've got to have one to acquire the gun in the first place. But once you legally possess the gun, we don't think you ought to have another one to carry it. Now, what we do know is there are now, I think, 7 states that have enacted this year. Kansas and Maine enacted constitutional carry, which means there's no background checks required in those states at all. Vermont has had that rule since they became a state, so for over 200 years. No background checks, citizens carry what they want, where they want. 30 states have modified constitutional carry where they don't require any background check at all to carry the gun openly. So every state that touches Tennessee, except for Georgia, allows their citizens to carry guns openly, no background checks. Tennessee, for the last year, since July 14, allows any citizen who can legally possess a gun to transport it without a permit in a vehicle that they legally possess. No background checks, other than the purchase of the gun. So what we see from looking at that, survey of 50 states is that 60% of them don't require background checks for citizens to carry guns, and crime's not any worse. Accidental shootings aren't any worse. So is there really any reason to rationally believe that the background check makes us safer?
So when I hear you say that, I hear you saying that Tennessee has unusually tough gun laws.
In that context, yeah.
I find surprising. I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't think that. But overall, okay, you're saying in that context, overall, how would you say our gun laws are?
We rank about 24 out of 50 states. When you look at organizations that rank states based upon firearms ownership issues and handgun permit holder issues, Tennessee is actually worse than some states like Pennsylvania.
Okay. All right, let's go to Paul. Hello, Paul.
Yes, sir.
Go right ahead.
Your show tonight. Appreciate it. It was mentioned earlier that mental institutions were closed for lack of funding.
Right.
Now, I'm old enough to remember back in the 60s, the idiots over there at the ACLU, through lawsuits, were able to close these institutions. And another thing I noticed that gets ignored quite frequently is a common denominator of these mass shooters taking these mind or mood-altering drugs. And I think that's about 90% of the problem right there, I believe. And I sure do thank you guys.
Okay.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on
Well,
that?
I think there may be a correlation between the multi-victim shooters abusing either prescription or non-prescription drugs. But what is clear from the statistics that's been made of like Columbine, Newtown, you pick a multi-victim shooting, they almost always have some level of mental illness. It may be exacerbated by illegal drug use, but mental illness is clearly a common core amongst all of those predators. And like we said earlier, the thing that really sort of scares me now is we're going to be adding to that in our society the intentional multi-victim shootings coming from terrorism. I think we're just starting to see the tip of that iceberg. If you look what's going on in Europe, and we're isolated by the oceans, but the events in Europe with multi-victim shootings that are terrorist-based over the last 5 years have increased significantly, and that's coming here whether we like it or not.
So now that's scary.
Yes.
Is that using fear, or you believe that we're going to have those kind of things just happening here?
Oh, we're going to have them. It's just a matter of time and when.
All right, let's go to William. Hello, William.
Hello, how are you? Thank you very much for taking my call.
You're welcome. Go right ahead. What's on your mind?
I'm coming.
Okay.
I'm an older male, and I've heard all my adult life through what I consider reputable people and reputable writings that the gun laws we currently have are absolutely sufficient, but they're not being enforced. Now, they're not being enforced by prosecutors, or police don't want to take the time to sit down and write out the report. Answer my question, please.
So why are the gun laws not being enforced is your question?
Well, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that premise. I'm a practicing attorney, and I don't see any hesitation at all if the gun law is being violated, either with local law enforcement or federal law enforcement or the ATF coming after somebody. There's not a leniency standard necessarily laying out there. Enforcement may be that they're getting into the criminal justice system and they're plea bargaining out. Enforcement may be that we look at a multi-victim shooting and the guy had a gun he shouldn't have had, and someone says, well, that law didn't get enforced. So there's a lot of ways that the old wives' tale of we've got 20,000 on the books, they're not being enforced, one more won't make a difference. I do agree with that. We've got more than enough laws on the books to deal with this criminal element. I don't know that it's law enforcement or the judges or the district attorneys saying, hey, we're just not going to enforce the gun laws.
It's interesting now, you drive around town, at least in Nashville, and you're seeing some billboards about buy a gun for someone else and do 10 years in prison. So what's behind that? What's going on there? I haven't seen that message put out there with the kind of money behind it that it must have. It's on a lot of billboards. I've heard radio commercials. What's going on there?
You know, it's a curious statute. That particular thing is what's called a straw man purchase. And it dates all the way back to 1968 with the passage of the Federal Gun Control Act. And basically what it says is you can't go in like we used to do, you watch a gazillion movies and teenagers will pay an adult, extra money to go and buy the beer. It's basically the same thing. That's a straw purchase.
Right.
So we've had this law on the books for a long time that says you can't go buy a gun, falsify the transaction reports and say you're buying it and then walk out the door and give it to somebody else. That's a straw purchase. It's illegal. And so what we have seen, though, is these billboards pop up trying to tell people, if you do that, you could do 10 years in prison. And that's true. It's a federal charge. But I'm not aware. I represent a lot of gun dealers and in matters involving the ATF. And over the last 15 years that I've particularly worked in that area, I've seen maybe 2 or 3 straw purchases that the ATF prosecuted in cases that I was involved in. It just doesn't happen a lot.
So then what do you think's behind the message? It's an interesting message that, again, has a lot of money behind it. On some level, it might be from someone who wants to convey, we already have a lot of tough laws on the books, we don't need any more. Or maybe it's from someone who's trying to convey, here's a law that isn't enforced enough. Or maybe it's just from someone who just wants to inform people about a law on the books. I don't know about that. But what do you think is behind that?
To me, it's got to be some kind of federal grant money that's pushing the advertising, because it's not like we've had a sudden rash of problems with this. I can remember one case in the news in the last 2 years involving a straw purchase, and I thought the guy got convicted of federal charges, and he shouldn't have been. And you might remember it. It was in the Northeast, and a police officer who, because he was a police officer, could buy guns at this particular gun store at a discount. His dad wants that particular gun, but the dad lives in the state, next to him. It'd be like, me and my father-in-law lives in Hopkinsville. Well, this police officer buys the gun for his dad, fills out the form saying he's buying it, gets it to his dad reimburses him for it. This police officer is convicted of a federal crime because he filled out the form saying he was the buyer. Now, he could have legally filled out the form and given the gun to his dad as a gift. That's perfectly okay. But his dad couldn't reimburse him for it because that's a straw purchase. Mm-hmm. Now, should the guy go to prison for 5 years for that? I don't think so.
But there are cases. I mean, I do know there are cases where people will go and buy a gun, and I can't cite them, but
Yeah.
these
like
have
beer.
happened, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it happens.
People will buy a gun and give it to somebody else. I mean, so-and-so can't buy a gun, so they go in. Now, you're saying it doesn't happen very often.
Well, I'm sure it happens, but you don't have to go to a dealer to do it, because federal law doesn't require there be any background checks at all on casual purchases. So if you wanted to buy one of my guns and it was just a private sale, there's no background check.
Right.
And so you take the gun, give it to whoever you want it to. Under federal law, I can buy a gun with the intent that it be a gift and give it to anybody, as long as I don't have reason to believe that they're a criminal or can't legally own the gun. But they can't reimburse me for it.
Okay, we have to take a break. Now we're going to come back. We'll take the last several calls here and just talk some more. We'll take a break. Be back right after this.